bubble, which we now have a pretty good idea that wasn't a bad call. Has it popped?
Well, I think in some sectors of the economy, it's obviously popped. If we look at the credit of households, then we have some stress on the household sector because they can't get the mortgages and can't refinance their homes. And so there's some illiquidity there. And then this illiquidity has spread also into the CDO market, into commercial papers and so forth. So in general, I think we have kind of a battlefield between the Fed and central banks pushing money into the system. In the third quarter, MZM was growing at an annual rate of over 18%. So we have tremendous liquidity injections by central banks, also in Europe, the UK. And at the same time, we have illiquidity brought about by the marketplace, the household sector, falling home prices, and so forth. And who will win this battle is difficult to tell. If you just throw money at the system like the Fed does, it may not help the real economy in the United States. It may weaken the US dollar further and create the big bubbles overseas, as we've seen recently, the China bubble, which could still double in price. I'm not saying it will collapse tomorrow. It could collapse tomorrow, but it may still go on for a while, depending on how much money is created.
When you recognize a bubble and when we go through these gut-wrenching periods, would you say we're in a better position to deal with it now than we were in February when we were just clueless, just walking along like risk was never going to be reasserted again? I mean, has it been cathartic at all yet, or we still have a lot more pain?
I think the longer you postpone the hour of truth, in other words, you solve your problems with what brought about the problems, namely easy monetary policies and excessive debt growth, the worse it will be and the more difficult it is to solve. I think we should have taken worldwide a steeper recession in 2001 and cleaned some of the excesses instead of piling one bubble in the housing market on top of the NASDAQ bubble we had at the time.
Kicking the can down the road and not dealing with it when you should have dealt with it.
And don't forget, we never had this kind of credit expansion in the US since 2000. Nominal GDP has been going up totally by 4.2 trillion and total credit market debt by over 21 trillion. So in other words, debt is growing at 5 times nominal GDP, and we will reach 0 hours when additional debt doesn't help the economy and just goes into speculation or eventually into probably consumer price inflation that is already today higher than what is being published.
Yeah, you think the CPI is a bit of a joke, right?
Yeah, not a bit of a joke, a total joke.
And I love your latest note, which you talk about, so you make comparisons to Zimbabwe. And
yes,
this
correct.
trip that you recently made shopping for, was it squash?
Yes.
In Zimbabwe. You went 5 days later, and the price was up 500%.
Yes, exactly, yes. It's not going to happen in the US tomorrow, but part of the increase in commodity price, I'm not saying everything, there have been some structural changes, in particular the incremental demand coming from China for resources has driven prices higher. But part of it, as this commentator just said before on your program, it's a bubble. And part of it is excessive monetary growth and credit growth that leads to overconsumption in the US, the growing current account deficit, the $800 billion flowing into the world, and creating what some people call excess savings. But actually, it's the easy monetary policy of the US that leads to the current account deficit and
Marc,
the surpluses.
The lead story in the Wall Street Journal today says that shipping costs are a big part of the reason for the climb that we've seen in commodities prices. Sometimes you're paying more to ship something than it even costs to get it out of the ground.
Yes, precisely, that is correct.
Just adding to the
yes.
Adds to
look, I'm not debating. We have a global boom. There's no question about this. And this is so unique in the history of capitalism that the whole world is booming at the same time. Because let's say you look at the last 50 years, something was booming, say, the US, then something else like Japan in the last 15 years wasn't, then so forth. So we have a global boom at the present time. But if you look at the previous histories of booms and busts, then you look at the canal boom or railroad boom or the boom in oil and in gold in 1970 to 1980. These were regional booms or concentrated in one sector. If you have a global synchronized boom, I suppose one day we'll have a global synchronized bust.
Don't say it. I knew that's where you were going. We were going to talk about emerging markets right now. I don't, maybe you don't like the domestic market. It doesn't seem to me like you're making the case to put all your money in emerging markets right now either.
Certainly not. Because
is there any place in emerging markets that is reasonable in terms of valuation?
Well, there are emerging economies that are kind of reasonable, but might say it's not an emerging market, but Japan is very reasonable. The problem is if you buy Japan and if you buy Thailand, which is also reasonable, the other markets like China drop 30-40%, which would not be a lot, considering that they've gone up 6 times since 2005 in the case of China, and 6 times since 2003 in the case of India. So 30-40% drop wouldn't surprise me. But if they dropped 30-40%, I think they would drag down the other markets as well.
Well, then I'm trying to figure out, then, should you put a lot of money in gold? Obviously, you shouldn't put money in cash because it'd be in the dollar. Maybe put it in, what, Swiss francs or something?
Well, but you see, now sentiment about the US dollar is extremely negative.
So
and whereas I think that the dollar will be worthless eventually, we still have hope for maybe the 10 next days or, for the next 3 months or 1 year. I think in general, if I compare US dollar to euro, I rather think that Euroland is expensive compared to the United States, the price level. And sentiment on the dollar is extremely bearish, and sentiment on gold and other commodities is very bullish, and on stocks and on emerging markets.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful, and I would rather hold some cash. I think I'm a gold person that recommends to buy gold as a currency, but it's now also overbought near term.
I'm thinking bomb shelters and canned goods listening to you right now. I may just go...
Get some ammunition
No,
and
you
a
don't.
rifle.
But a good investment for you would be to buy a farm and then learn how to drive a tractor, because you understand, the real estate that is vulnerable is real estate in financial centers like New York, London, Frankfurt, Zurich, and so forth, Hong Kong, Singapore, whereas the countryside real estate is not that vulnerable, and it's much safer to live in the countryside than in in a city where you have lots of people.
It's a different way of life, too. A little bit more... can we stay here? We have to go now, but I want to talk to you about... And you'll be back,
Yes.
but that appeals to me, the whole agrarian...
You're a farmer.
and my daughter loves animals.
You are in the countryside here already.
It's actually not far from the truth.
Marc will join us twice more this morning at 7:40 Eastern and 8:40. And I'm going to talk to David Faber, too, because Faber
and Faber.
If you could call yourself either Faber or Faber, why would you do Faber? I mean, I'm going to start
I think
calling
it is David Faber. He's just changed it.
Sounds, I listen to him a lot more.
Still to come this morning, the UAW and Chrysler agree to a tentative labor deal. But what if the workers, the rank and file, don't ratify? There's the growing likelihood